Labor union strikes are breaking out across France, disrupting train services, flights, schools, and businesses. This as the French government plans to raise the retirement age for workers from 62 to 64. Joining us now with the latest, Newsmax correspondent Sarah Coates, who is live now in Paris. Sarah.
Yes, hello, Bob. Hello, Katrina. Well, it certainly was a day of chaos right around the country. Protests breaking out in all of the major cities and a lot of little towns following a call to action from these 8 major labour unions right across the country. It is important to point out that this was the first time that they all unified, solidified in more than a decade. Now, what we can tell you is that hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets demanding that the Macron government drop its controversial pension reform plan, which, as you mentioned, would see people working from, instead of retiring at 62 years of age, they would work until they are 64. Now, the government says that this is completely necessary to deal with a massive gap there, a massive pension deficit. I need to tell you that it costs the French around 14% of their annual output every year. Now, this pension reform plan would potentially raise around 19 billion euros per year, which the Macron government says would really bridge that gap if it were to be raised by 2030. Now, it will run into a few challenges there, though, of course. It will be an uphill battle given that the Macron government no longer has the majority in Parliament. So what it is really banking on there is the support of the Conservative Les Republicans. So it is really hoping that it can sort of twist their arm. Otherwise, there is one other sort of constitutional loophole that it can get this passed without having it debated in the Assembly and without having a vote. So, you know, it is really shaping up to be a pretty intense few months ahead to see whether the Macron government can actually do this. He tried to do it back in 2019, but it was put on the back burner in 2020 when major protests broke out and, of course, the coronavirus.
All right, Sarah Coates, thanks so much. Joining us now to continue the conversation, former Moscow and Paris correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, Craig Copetas. Craig, your reaction to Sarah's report and what's happening in Paris. We're talking about raising the retirement age from 62 to 64, essentially.
Well, the Germans retire at 67, the Spanish at 65, and the United Kingdom at 66. What's significant here is that you have all of these 8 unions. Everyone in France has a union out on the streets. And it may appear somewhat bamboozling to an American audience, but it's very important to remember that the French approach their system of socialized healthcare and subsidized early retirement with the same cultural passion that Americans embrace the right to bear arms. So what you're seeing out there is not a socialist manifestation as such, but a cultural representation of the French who feel this is their right. And according to the polls, at least minimum 68% of the French voting public are against these reforms. And that number may be actually an under number.
I was just looking this up off the spur of the moment. The average lifespan of a French person is 82 years. You've got them proposing raising the retirement age. These people, on average, are going to live another 20 years. That means a good percentage are going to live into their 90s. How does a country sustain that kind of financial imposition?
Well, Bob, you win the bingo. No, you really do, because this is a math problem. Look, 50 years ago, you had 4 workers for every retiree. Now you have in the neighborhood of 1.6, 1.7 workers per retiree. So the money, you know, the numbers just don't add up. And, you know, the days of old school socialism are long over. In fact, there's no longer really a socialist party in France. In fact, a few years ago, they had to sell their headquarters to pay their bills. So what you're looking at here, it's true. What you're looking at here is basically a cultural change. This is not We're not looking at a political change here, but a real cultural change in what the Macron government is saying. Look, if the United Kingdom's working till 66, Spain is 65, and the Germans are going to 67, what's wrong with 64 years old?
Yeah, right.
All right, Craig Copetas, really appreciate your insight. Thank you.